should we wait longer or? Okay, then maybe I will just let Daniel know that we will start now and here maybe, yes. Okay, we only wait like 2 more minutes and then we will start. We just wait for Natalia Winke and then we will start. Yes. Okay. Okay. I think we are all here now. So, dear guests, dear participants, dear artists and curators, dear all. A very warm welcome from the Center for Art and Media Karlsruhe to the opening event of the 3-day symposium After Memory, recalling and foretelling across time, space, and networks. We at the ZKM are delighted to collaborate with the After Memory team and the University of Arts and Design Karlsruhe on this extremely exciting and important topic of forgetting and remembering in the digital age. The International Symposium brings together protagonists from art, science, technology, museology, and activism to explore the temporal, spatial, and social dimension of digital memory. The program is curated by Natalia Lavinge, Victor Fancelli, Capdevila, and Lisa Demmel. I would like to take this opportunity to briefly introduce the three curators. Natalia Lavinge holds a PhD from Facultad de Arquitectura y Urbanismo da Universidad de São Paulo and a master's degree in critical theory and culture studies from Birkbeck University of London. Her research interests involve topics such as social documentation and circulation of images on social networks. As a curator, she has organized exhibitions such as Against Again, Art Under Attack in Brazil at the Shiva Gallery in New York, and Tactics of Disappearance in Sao Paulo, among others. She is currently a junior fellow at the Käthe-Hamburger Kolleg, Cultures of Research at Rheinisch-Westfälische Technische Hochschule in Aachen. Victor Fancelli Capdevila works as a digital archivist at the Open Research Center in Karlsruhe. He completed a master's degree in media philosophy and art history at the Karlsruhe University of Arts and Design, as has since dedicated his research to the political relationships between people, technology, education, and shared memory. This is reflected in his contribution to various conferences on archiving and teaching, as well as in digital literacy workshops for NGOs as part of the EU3 digital project. Lisa Demmel works as an independent curator and writer for public institutions and non-profit organizations such as Haus der Kulturen der Welt in Berlin, Haus der Kunst in München, or Ashwal Awan in Beirut. I hope I spelled it right. Her texts have been featured in many exhibition catalogs as well as in journals, including Sur Texte, Pars, and Critical Arts. From 2025, she will take up the co-directorship of the Halle of Kunst Lüneburg together with Marie-Sophie Dorsch. Before I hand over to the three curators who will talk about the symposium in more detail, I would like to point us two organizational aspects. The program will take place at various locations in Karlsruhe, including the ZKM and the HFG. The events at the ZKM will take place on Thursday and Saturday in the museum, which is part of the ZKM exhibition Fellow Travelers, Art as a Tool to Change the World, and on Friday in the Media Theater of ZKM. In parallel, there will be a live stream that will enable online participation in the individual events. The exact program of the symposium can be found on the After Memory website, aftermemory.net. Last but not least, I would like to point out that there will be a get-together later on, to which I cordially invite you all. And now I'd like to hand over to Lisa, Natalia, and Victor. Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Good evening. It's a great pleasure for us to be here. And we have a long list of people to say thank you. Then we do this in the end. We'll start with just reading some opening remarks that we wrote individually, but as part of the same idea that is behind the beginning of this project. Yeah, I read a short text to start. What comes after memory? I came across this question in one of the first drafts of this project, written almost 2 years ago. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to find out from the question, and we eventually removed it from our conceptual blurb. But while reading the first draft again, I'm drawn back to this question. Maybe I needed to ask in a different way. It is hard to imagine what is coming after memory, since afterness is what has been lacking more in recent times. Trapped as we are in endless present, experiencing time perception obliterated by information overload, it is hard to find any sort of escape room that allows us to imagine what is about to come. Different from other historical moments, we are stuck in the present now. In a way, it shouldn't be so bad. This is, after all, the only temporal condition that we can know. It is in the present when memories are constantly updated, when you conceive in our imagination what is about to come. There are probably positive effects of changing the focus of the so-evoked future of past, as we did other times, and which have diverted our attention from what is happening now. But this is not what you can say based on our experience of being constantly stuck on the platform, to borrow the title of Herk Lovnig's most recent book. If you have reached the end of an era of possibilities and speculations, as he affirms, what is the emergency exit for this reality in which platforms have closed any chance of collective imagination? If temporal fragmentation is far from a new thing, it is hard to deny that the internet complex has made this feeling stronger in recent years, and especially under the circumstance imposed by the COVID-19, when the immersive experience of screen became the default perception. This effect was even stronger. Well, needless to say that many of these ideas discussed here have their roots in what we have lived during the pandemic, when most of us have experienced some episode of memory blur or digital amnesia. Although the impact of COVID-19 in our cognitive system is still unclear, recent studies reveal deficits in the performance of people a year or more after infection. But even the lockdown itself left some marks too, since spatial memory is essential in how we recollect events. And if time perception was especially obliterated during the pandemic, this feeling is inseparable from the well-known time-space compression, which was always related with capitalism expansion. But how different is this process nowadays when the rise of generative AI, for instance, has created a new understanding about memory, making us confronting a past that never really existed? From some of these ideas, we developed the structure of After Memory Symposium in 3 sections, each investigating an essential aspect of the conception and actualization of memory: space, time, and communication. I'll just talk briefly about this last one, which we are calling speculative networks. The starting point came from this current discussion about the Internet's lost decade and the end of a fantasy that the Web 2.0 would be a democratic environment. If there is no alternative to the current state of the Internet controlled by private corporation platforms, it is essential to devise other networks. This would be discussed in our last roundtable, which I will moderate on Saturday. The 4 participants will present artistic and activist projects that imagine or put in practice alternative forms of connection, placing attention on communication systems and rethinking a sense of community. And to end, the symposium is just the first stage of the After Memory project, which will continue in the following years with an exhibition and other public programs to be developed next year. Yeah. If it's not possible to imagine what comes after memory, at least we can take these days to experience the present in a different way, expanding time, space, and communication, and enabling memory to be updated more slowly and deeply.
Since the beginning of our discussion, our project has been quite nomadic, marked by a lot of video conference, email, chat communication. Actually, it's really rare that the 3 of us share the same space, and it's certainly related to the digital that plays an important role on how we have been working. So we want to also welcome the people following this event through the streaming from elsewhere. We are really happy that our first gathering is happening exactly here in Karlsruhe, here in ZKM, here in the HFK, here in the media launch in front of the library, because the library was thought to connect both institutions, the ZKM with the museum part and the HFK, which is the university. And we also try to integrate here. And Lisa and Natalia have been confronting our ideas with part of the students of the HFK during last semester, and the feedback that we got was really good and interesting. So that's exactly what connecting different places and people means also that the quantities of information becomes too big for human to process. And some of us, maybe all of us, are collapsing on this perfect data storm. Maybe we could explain, maybe that could explain our obsession in delegate the filtration to algorithms and external systems that select and order what is happening now across an endless feed, or even the delegation of the material activating our memories. 3 preconceptions might be important to consider here. First, that the digital is not robust or permanent, but the contrary, needs a lot of maintenance. The digital establishes a lot of dependencies with other agents, and it's fragile. Just last week, the Internet Archive was down, and some of you may experience losing your data in old social media platforms, not to talk about the frustration of trying to retrieve data from an old hard drive not working. If we want to use the digital to store material that relates us to the past, we should consider deep this aspect. Secondly, we need to consider the historical memory, or how we conceptualize time. Somehow, maybe because of the historical context, maybe because of the overwhelming of the digital, we tend to think that we are in a permanent now, and we have nothing to share to the future, and that the past simply has been always there. It seems that we are taking the past as a given, which is actually the translation of data, if you think about it, ignoring that this repository was created or developed at some moment by some people, and how much work it has to be done to bring this past to us. We have seen that the classical model of one big line called history with a capital H, written among the invisible work of state archivists, is really not working, and we would feel more comfortable thinking in different lines, curved circles connecting to different archive institutions, groups, movements, and times, crossing and connecting each other. The third aspect is that remember and forgetting are both parts of memory, which is in constant transformation. Here, forgetting can mean delegating the activation of memory to other agents in order to have our mind free for other inputs, as in writing something down to be able to forget it. Or it can be something like moving on, starting a new project, or process or overcome a trauma. If we will only remember, nothing new will never happen. Yet on the internet, preserving files or systems might be complex, but deleting and forgetting or being forgotten might be as complex as the previous. So we are stuck in a perpetual now, in a limbo between remembering and forgetting, and maybe thinking digital alternatives out of pure preservation of documents might help us to have a better relation with the digital and the memory. Memory has been a constant activity trying to be a bridge, like the library here, between a past, present, trying to communicate to the future, and a present trying to communicate to the past. But this communication is possible only if we gather in group and form networks.
This project has been developing for 2 years, 1 year, so bear with us. We have a lot to say that has sort of amassed over these last 12 to 24 months. I maybe want to start with a little anecdote. I was reading a text about spatial memory and how space is used as a mnemonic device to remember things. And yeah, it's a very common technique in mnemonic studies. And I read that if you put objects in mind in a space, it's easy to retrace them and thus to remember them. But if in your imaginary walk through a house you need to pass through a door to reach another room full of objects to remember, it's much harder to remember them. The door is sort of like a liminal zone that is hard to cross in remembrance. And I feel like in many ways, maybe we could embrace this door space, this bridge space that we're on also today, and think about the difficulties of remembering in both ways and forgetting in both ways also. Many have argued that digital networks have brought us closer. They enable us to communicate across long distances, share information in real time, and maintain friendships and family ties beyond the confines of a nation state, and I think that's an experience that many of us actually share. For many of the contributors at this symposium, digital networks are the basic condition to do our work, to do research about historical events and political developments that may take place far away, and to engage with communities who may be far apart. It seems that there is no mountain high enough, no river wide enough. And yet, as we will discuss in the roundtable on mapping landscapes, which is sort of the first section of this symposium, digital networks have also widened some rivers and raised some mountains. As studies show, they increase hate speech, enforce biases and stigmata, and are a driving force in the trend towards social polarization. As digital networks extend across the globe, they seem to sharpen the spotlight on our own place in it, from where we are speaking and listening, within which cultural and geographical frameworks we are remembering and forgetting, which experiences of displacement and replacement have come to inform our practices, and where does a sense of belonging move us. In short, the ambivalent nature of digital landscapes and computational cartographies require us to situate ourselves carefully, maybe even ethically. I'm no longer sure whether it was coincidence or rather like a cynical sense of foreboding that I, as the German in this group, came to talk about memory and space, and how remembrance is inscribed in a national identity, which is a discussion that has come to haunt this project increasingly and repeatedly. In fact, we felt like, especially in the past months, this project has been taken over by reality more often than not. Many of us, some present in person, some online, have been personally affected by the current wars unfolding. Many of us have family and friends who have had to flee their homes and took only their bare essentials with them. Some memories they carry with them, many they leave behind. Memories may be both a light luggage and a heavy burden to carry, and more often than not, forgetting may be an essential part of the process of moving on. So actually, I think the question of what comes after memory is more urgent than ever. And maybe this brings us back to the notion of the door that we need to cross through and remember despite forgetting. Given these circumstances, I'm extremely grateful, and I think Natalia and Victor will join me in saying thanks that so many have taken the time and energy to join us here today, both on site and online. I'm happy that the task of giving thanks is now falling on me. And first and foremost, I want to thank the contributors who will be sharing their thoughts, ideas, and experiences over the course of the next 3 days. I think it's a really incredible program, and Natalia, Victor, and I were incredibly grateful to all of you. Our heartfelt thanks also goes out to our two partner institutions, ZKM and HFG, who were open to a bunch of freelancers with a big idea and brave enough to embark on this journey with us. I think many wouldn't have taken this on. I also want to thank Jan Motika, who designed our visual identity and made this little folder that many of you have, which is hopefully a device that helps you to remember, even though you might forget. And at ZKM especially, I want to thank Gloria Aino-Civac, who also introduced us, Daniel Pies, Philipp Ziegler, Christian Hart, and Felix Mittelberger. At HFG, I want to thank Professors Constanze Fischbeck and Simon Scheik, Chancellor Thomas Fröhlich, and Technical Coordinator Therese Braunschweig. We've received generous support from the teams of both institutions and for the technical and logistical setup and for communicating this event. So I would like to thank especially Andreas Kaufmes, who is there in the back supporting us tonight, Moritz Büchner, Anni Koch, Lucia Stockinger, and the Studio Jungs, Alex, Sebastian, and Tobi, as well as Anna Volkland, Simone Heinrich, Anne Thome, and Sabine Jäger. And as you will note from the row of logos at the bottom of our posters and program schedules, we've also received generous funding from different organizations, especially the Cultural Office of the City of Karlsruhe as part of UNESCO City of Media Arts. And there we especially want to thank Daniela Burkhardt. as well as support of the Support Association of Fördergesellschaft of ZKM and HFG, who've supported us when it was most urgently needed, as well as the LBBW Stiftung and Sparkasse Karlsruhe. And last but not least, I get to thank Natalia for having the initiative to start this project and to bring me into this, and for her trust and endless imagination that she's brought to the project, and to Victor, whose endless generosity in hosting us here in Karlsruhe. That is simply something we couldn't have done without him. So with this, I want to pass back to Gloria, who will be introducing our contributor tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia, Lisa, and Victor. I'm very delighted to welcome the artist Maryam Monalisa Gharavi at this point. Maryam Monalisa Gharavi is an artist, poet, and technologist. Her book bio was the first to be written on a social media platform while bypassing big data storage sites. Other books include The Distancing Effect, Secret Catalan Poem, and the co-authored All News 1989 to 2020. Exhibition of her work include Sonic X in Amsterdam, New Museum in New York, the Serpentine Cinema in London, Passo des Arts in Sao Paulo, and Recess in New York, among others. She is the founder of Our Research Group, short ORG, a one-woman collective investigating oil and data. ORG was awarded an anonymous was a Woman Environmental Art Grant in 2023. She lives and works in New York City. I'm really happy that you're here tonight, so please welcome now Maryam Monalisa Gharavi, who will start now with her lecture performance, Third Dept, Death and Data. Welcome.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Good evening, or it's 1:36 p.m. in New York, so good afternoon there too. I just also want to say thank you to Natalia, Victor, and Lisa for the invitation, and all those at ZKM and those partner institutions that made this possible, and all of the interlocutors whose work I'm really excited to see. This is a terrible historical juncture, not only because of the events of the day, but how these events are historicized in real time. And so I want to begin this iteration of our ongoing work, Dirt, Debt, Death, Data, by saying that the production of history has its own history, and that history is stamped with betrayal. If you'll indulge our obsession with etymology, betrayal descends from the Latin tradere, to hand over, to give by transgressing or stepping over a line. To betray eventually becomes to prove false, violate by unfaithfulness by the 13th century, and later transmutes to unintentionally show a true character, to indicate what is not obvious by the 16th and 17th century. Or, in the words of the 20th century artist Joe Brainerd, an ounce of oil can cover 8 acres. In 1901, William Knox Darcy, a millionaire London socialite, signed an exclusive agreement with Muzaffar ad-Din Shah, the 5th king of the Qajar era, to be exclusive speculator of oil in Persia. In return, Darcy promised 20,000 pounds, which is equivalent to $706,685.71 in today's currency, equal shares in the company, and 16% of future profits. Competition between Russia and Britain for the petroleum concession was fierce. Thank you. But Britain backed Darcy from the beginning as Russia tried to block the deal. Darcy offered the Shah an extra 5,000 pounds from his personal coffers in order to close the deal, and in May of that year, the Shah signed an 18-point concession that would give Darcy the exclusive right to prospect, explore, exploit, and transport natural gas, petroleum, asphalt, mineral waxes in Persia, and to sell them, bearing in mind Marshall McLuhan's famous dictum, quote, "Every new technology necessitates a new war," or in this case, the attritional war of extractivism. With the concession in hand, Darcy hired George Reynolds, who had experience in oil drilling from Sumatra. Reynolds was variously known as an engineer, a geologist, a manager, a diplomat, a field representative, linguist, anthropologist, and, quote, "stern taskmaster." Regardless of those accolades, Reynolds' venture was slowly proving to be a disaster, and back in England, Darcy was close to despair. He had gambled his considerable fortune on oil, and now he and his wife, pictured in the prior slide, was on the verge of losing it all, both the country houses and his mansion in Grosvenor Square. It seemed that the encouraging geologists had all been wrong about the oils beneath the sands. Having never set foot in Persia himself, Darcy didn't even have adventure travel stories to show for his investment. What he had were letters and telegrams from Reynolds, his principal explorer, urging patience, practically begging to extend the search until every possibility had been exhausted. But patience, like Darcy's finances, had run thin. After 7 years and millions of pounds of searching for oil, Darcy and his prospector partners were close to shutting down their entire venture. Burma Oil sent a letter to Reynolds advising him to slow down production, pack up equipment and personnel. It was nearly all over. Just as the letter was making its way to Reynolds, at 4 a.m. on May 26, 1908, people at the site awoke to shouting as a 50-foot gusher of petroleum shot up the drilling rig. At last, the greatest oil field found up to that point was discovered at Mastedes-Suleiman in the province of Abadan, becoming the first commercial discovery of oil in the Middle East. Here's a screenshot of BP's website describing George Reynolds' visceral experience of smelling sulfur for the first time. Quote, "The smell was unmistakable. It was a smell you could see. The vapors rose clearly in the sunlight and stank of rotten eggs. It was the best thing he had smelled in 7 years. He instructed the men to keep drilling." Within months, the British arranged for a group of investors to organize a new corporation to absorb the Darcy concession and take control of oil exploration and development in Iran. The British government spent £2 million to buy 51% of the company. The Anglo-Persian Oil Company, who in 1935 changed its name to the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, was formed in London in April 1909. From that moment on, the interests of Britain and the company became one and inseparable. And this image is a British Petroleum Company Service Center in Tehran in 1921. This is the Tombi power generation plant in Mastedes-Suleiman, one of the first thermal power generation plants in Iran and the Middle East, launched shortly after well number 3 was spudded in Mastedes-Suleiman. This is one of the second and third generation of gas pumps in the world made by the British company Avery Hardell. The company started producing gas stations in Birmingham, England in 1900, just 1 year before the Darcy concession, initially producing hand pumps without a metering system. The model was produced with a rectangular cube body and a hand display from the 1940s onwards. The gasoline pump was used in the whole of Iran in the 1920s, and at the same time, with the increase of fuel consumption in the country, these pumps were removed from the fuel supply system and more modern pumps were put in their service. Before I move on, the video clip on the other screen is from Ebrahim Golistan's film, A Fire. It was one of 4 short documentaries he made at the beginning of his film career while working for oil companies, and it concerns a protracted fire and the attempts over several weeks to put it out. The footage of the plumes of the fire are evocatively shot, yet the subtext of the field is showing how the lives of villagers and farmers nearby are affected by the industry. Without an overarching environmental message, Golistan lingers on the disruption to traditional ways of life. The pump is so easy to work, you wonder why on earth self-service didn't become commonplace ages ago. But the satisfaction of doing it myself isn't much greater than that of using an automatic chocolate bar dispenser or any other money-munching device. The only operations that require some attention are those involved in paying. you have to place a 1,000-lira note in the right position in a little drawer so that a photoelectric eye can recognize the effigy of Giuseppe Verdi, or perhaps just the thin metal strip that crosses every banknote. It seems the value of the 1,000 lira is entirely concentrated in that strip. When the note is swallowed up, a light goes on, and I have to hurry to push the nozzle of the pump into the mouth of the tank and send the jet gushing in, compact and trembling in its iridescent transparency. Have to hurry up to enjoy this gift that is incapable of gratifying my senses, but nevertheless avidly craved by that part of me which is my means of locomotion. I have just enough time to think all this when with a sharp clip of the flow, when with a sharp click, the flow stops, the light goes off. The complicated mechanism set in motion for a few seconds ago is already stilled and inert. The stirring of those telluric powers my rituals called to life lasted no more than an instant. In return for 1,000 lira reduced to a meager metal strip, the pump will concede only a meager quantity of petrol. Crude costs $11 a barrel. I have to start all over again, feed in another note, then others again, 1,000 lira to go. Money and the subterranean world are family, and they go back a long way. Their relationship unfolds in one cataclysm after another, sometimes desperately slow, sometimes quite sudden. As I fill my tank at the self-service station, a bubble of gas swells up in a black lake buried beneath the Persian Gulf. An emir silently raises hands hidden in wide white sleeves and folds them on his chest. In a skyscraper, an Exxon computer is crunching numbers. Far out to sea, a cargo fleet gets the order to change course. I rummage in my pockets. The puny power of paper money evaporates. This is an excerpt from Italo Calvino's short story, The Petrol Pump. The premise here could not be more simple. During the hazy lull of midday, a nameless man goes to fill up his tank at a gas station. The narrator's interior perception of this act, his defamiliarization of a familiar public task, and the rhizomatic connections made between petroleum and money is what makes the story, written in the heyday of the 1970s oil crisis, dizzyingly on the nose, or on the money. They don't call it petrodollars for nothing. All we know from the story itself is that it was written in some vague moment in the 20th century. From the first sentence, I should have thought of it before, it's too late now, Calvino's narrator is starved for time. As the clock rounds 12:30, the Italian riposo, or midday rest period, will soon be at odds with the creeping empty on the oil meter. The anxiety about time, foreshadowing the looming danger of sucking 1,000 lira note after another into the petrol pump's cylindrical pneumatic tube, contrasted with the always present anxiety of the pump's own hydraulic system, which Calvino renders forward not out of environmental concern as such, though an undercurrent of anxiety about dwindling resources and supplies runs like an electric current throughout the vignettes. And here is only the fourth sentence of a 4.5-page short story, the writing itself an urgent exemplar of economy. Quote, if I set off now, there's a danger I'll run out on the way. The gauge has been warning me for quite a while that the tank is in reserve. They have been warning us for quite a while that underground global reserves can't last more than 20 years or so. I had plenty of time to think about it. As usual, I've been irresponsible. When the red light begins to wink on the dashboard, I don't pay attention, or I put things off. I tell myself there's still the whole reserve to use up, and then I forget about it. I don't pay attention, I put things off, I forget about it. The indebtedness is threefold here: on the level of the car, its endless need for guzzling oil, and the clock time of the petrol station, contrasting with the lassitude of non-machine driven life. The psychological effects might galvanize our attention as the narrator, again, presciently for his time, is aware of the attention economy required to keep his car, and by extension himself, from breaking down in the middle of nowhere. The threefold flow of time, petrol, and money trickles down together in an anxiety-ridden concern whose target is both specific and non-directed, an ambient awareness of something ending, something forgotten, something dying. And here's an image of that banknote with Giuseppe Verdi's face, looking quite tired himself. You can purchase this currency on eBay. Although our personal favorite currency, gifted years ago by a Mexican poet, is the 10,000 peso banknote issued by the Bank of Mexico in 1982, Depicted on the 10,000 peso is President Lázaro Cárdenas, who nationalized the oil industry in 1938, becoming the first nation to do so. In front view is La Cangrejera petrochemical complex in Veracruz. The back view shows archaeological discoveries made in Mexico City during the excavation of Templo Mayor, the main temple of the Mexican peoples, placing all three extractive properties, geological, archaeological, petrological, in one national heritage continuum. Calvino's narrator similarly projects the material logic of oil on the banknote he deposits, though importantly, he creates a gap or suture or leak in the flowy, liquidy, streamlined process of pumping gas with his vexations about oil's internal and external life systems. Inside his head, inside his car, inside the petrol station. But then, in the impossible camera angle, inside the petrol pump itself. Inside the oil sands beneath the Earth's surface, inside the reach of 20th century technology, whose geographical and historical margins shifted human, mineral, and animal life systems forever. Materially less than visible, because we don't typically interact with bitumen, coal, nuclear energy, complex plastic polymers, or shale gas in a direct way, the cost of extraction is absented from the site of consumption, or in the words of the great Dolly Parton, you'd be surprised how much it costs to look this cheap. The term petroculture was invented to describe the universe of engagement with petrochemicals and everything we see, wear, and touch. Perhaps the narrator in the petrol pump might do well to invent the new term petropsychology. To the surprise of no one who has followed the 20th century's histories of political upheaval, the oil and gas industry, or ONG, considers oil reserves, meaning that which is in the ground, unproduced, to be the richest in the Middle East and Latin America. South and Central America have the highest oil reserves in the world. In fact, we have images in our files from the Oil and Gas Institute, an industry center in London, whose ONG course we enrolled in, but are not allowed to show them to you on threat of lawsuit. They're mostly just generalized clip art maps of the world with large circles placed over those two regions. Lest the truism of fossil fuel scarcity go by unchallenged, Venezuela has 900 years, not days, months, but years of gas reserves left. The Middle East has the highest gas reserves with the largest non-associated field in South Pars, Iran. By contrast, this is an image of Venezuelan refugees in Bogota selling artisanal crafts made out of worthless Venezuelan cash, extracting the only possible remaining value left of Bolivar bills. In February 2018, the Central Bank of Venezuela announced a 99.6% devaluation, which made the hard Bolivar the second least valued currency in the world, behind only, of course, the Iranian rial. 1 month later, with a declared state of emergency, a redenomination of the currency was announced. Shops and state banks began refusing the banknotes, and by November 2019, all notes issued except one were worthless. This is an image taken in Beirut showing butcher Mohammed Ali with a sign in his shop reading Mamnu ad-Dain, debt forbidden. Simultaneous down to the month with the Venezuelan model is the Lebanese liquidity crisis, its official title, which has seen a severe devaluation of the pound following the end of the Lebanese civil war. And of course, it was exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic in Lebanon and the 2020 Beirut port explosion, to say nothing of the ongoing catastrophic attacks on the country today. Alternatively referred to as the fuel crisis or the dollar crisis, due to the rapid disintegration of the Lebanese currency's 24-year peg to the dollar. It reached a historic minimum in 2022 with a full 93% devaluation of the pound. To give further perspective to the crisis in oil-backed financial engineering since at least the early 2000s, and consider generational divides, we might consider millennials, who as a historical anomaly are, quote, less likely to earn more than their parents than any previous generation in American history, end quote, according to the US Congress Joint Economic Committee. Pundits, however, still wonder why the most financially devastated generation in US history just isn't buying stuff anymore. To return to Calvino, banknotes, and petrol more explicitly, the economic and monetary and social systems left in the wake of neocolonial and neoliberal sites of extraction have not escaped leakage and contamination even in the richest nation in the global north. If it were up to me, we would tell the story with cartoons. In the 1990s, there was an argument made for teaching environmental education in elementary schools as a reparative measure for, quote, a nature deficit in school curricula. As a response to understanding this deficit, Michael Malouf coined the term petroliteracy. The significance of petroleum-based consumable products for children and petrocultural societies cannot be overstated, as any parent with a car or fire truck as any parent knows, with cars and fire trucks being many children, especially boys' first words. Even pre-verbal children read, quote, signs in a world built on the basic assumptions of petroculture. Or, as Pixar executive John Lasseter has commented, slice open one of my veins and cartoons will pour out. Open another vein and you'll get a flood of motor oil. As the child matures from Thomas the Tank Engine to racing cars to Star Wars, they might stumble upon this 2008 Pixar film whose logline reads, in the 22nd century, rampant consumerism and corporate greed have turned Earth into a garbage-strewn wasteland, and the megacorporation, by and large, that's B-U-Y, evacuates humanity to space on giant starliners, leaving WALL-E, or Waste Allocation Load Lifter Earth class, trash compacting robots to clean the Earth. WALL-E's oil usage is inherently benevolent. He's one of the good guys. Our own petroliteracy was fostered by a steady Saturday morning cartoon diet, including a fairly unusual superhero series called Captain Planet and the Planeteers. The show's running overlapped with our family's immigration from Iran to the United States, and at the beginning of each episode, the spirit of the earth, Gaia, voiced by Whoopi Goldberg, calls out, "My world is in peril." 5 young people from Africa, North America, Eastern Europe, Asia, and South America, this was a United Colors of Benetton era, combined their powers to summon Earth's greatest champion, Captain Planet, who must foil Captain Pollution in every scenario. Episodes end with children encouraged to connect the plot in environmental or socio-political ways to be part of the solution and not the pollution. We're curious in hindsight about the show's thinly veiled ethnic markers, with the coal villains dressed in Arabized clothing with Semitic noses, pockmarked mangled faces, and rats' tails. The Planeteers, regardless of racial diversity, are unblemished, bright, and of moral character, possessing ingenuity and positivity, much like WALL-E. As we were preparing these remarks, we heard the American poet Ray Armantrout read this poem in New York, explaining that she wrote it after playing with her grandchildren. Quote, on growth. Dressed all in plastic, which means oil, we're bright-eyed, scrambling for the colored cubes, spilled on the rug's polymer. Inside each is a tiny car. When we can't unscrew the tops, we cry for help. We're optimists, creatures that never wake, can sprout a whole new limb, a tail. This may be wrong. If it were up to us, we would frame the story around exhaustion. Exhaust, to draw out, as in draining water. Drink up, empty, draw off, or out, deplete. We ran a Google Ngram experiment on the historical usage of the word. The highest usage ever in Latin, circa the 1530s, corresponds to the periods of colonial extraction. By 1848, exhaust entered the English lexicon as the first use of the steam engine's waste gas, until our current use of the word as in exhaust pipes from the discovery of oil in the 1890s. In ONG extractivism, exhaust is not merely a byproduct of crude oil, that ugly smoke that flatulates from your car, but a terminal logic whereby the site of speculation never completely dies or gets financially disincentivized. The death of an oil well, for example, is financialized as an abandoned investment. Fracking is also an example of industrial exhaustion, whereby hydrocarbon and unconventional geological structure is produced using, quote, non-standard technique, often resulting in groundwater contamination and man-made earthquakes from underground explosives, or man-made infernos in a hot waste desert in Werner Herzog's Lessons of Darkness. The ravaged oil fields of post-Gulf War Kuwait consist only of overhead shots, perhaps only comprehensible an extraterrestrial, alien, bird's eye view or God's eye view vantage point. Or, as the Timothy Donnelly poem, Diet Mountain Dew casts, quote, I have built my ship of death aglow in sturdy chemicals and powered up at night like American Express. I'm all customer service, only minus the customer. No service to speak of other than death. You will know my logo by its absence and slogan from the past ad. For the sugared style of you on TV in my youth, it goes like this, when my thirst is at its worst. Our basic premise is that capital is dead labor, vampire-like, living only by sucking living labor. It lives the more it extracts. Capital is not merely ownership over the means of production. The means of production rely on the extraction of living labor. Nowhere is this more clearly demonstrated than in Amazon.com's Zen Booths, a standalone enclosure marked by its porta-potty shape. It is outfitted with plants, a fan, and a computer kiosk. As part of the company's self-described, quote, mission to be the Earth's safest place to work, exhausted workers are instructed to, quote, recharge and re-energize over softly wafting sounds, inbuilt guided meditations, positive affirmations, and visual representations of calming scenes. In the obligatorily extractivist economy, where capital, flows of labor, and estrangement are inseparable, the guiding question is who provides value to whom and for what. Jeff Bezos wrote his first letter to shareholders in 1997, his final robotic letter, in our view, in 2021 outlines the value that the company has created for shareholders since the stock first debuted at $1.50 a share. If you read some of the news reports, you might think that we have no care for our employees, end quote. A news headline from that same period on a new wearable surveillance and behavioral augmentation system reads, quote, Amazon unveils algorithm to track worker tendon and muscle use. Bezos' most appropriate ancestor in squeezing the most out of human body parts is Sir Richard Arkwright, whose cotton mills are depicted in Joseph Wright's 1782 painting, Arkwright's Cotton Mills by Night. We first learned about this painting in Jonathan Crary's book on sleep, 24/7, as a rare night scene in Romanticism painting. With the expansion of his operation, it became clear to Arkwright that the town of Cromford's existing population would provide inadequate volumes of labor. Importing out-of-town workers, Arkwright instigated the novel and highly disciplined working arrangements. Work was organized in 2 13-hour shifts. Bells rang at 5 a.m. and 5 p.m., and the gates were shut precisely at the overlap hours of 6 a.m. and 6 p.m., and anyone who was late was excluded from work for the rest of the day, and they were docked an extra day's pay. Novel practices included the utility of children as 2/3 of his workforce at his fulfillment center. In the years since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, we discovered that those without unsecured employment in the U.S. can be considered both essential and disposable. Food delivery workers in the gig economy, among the few that the New York Police Department allowed to break curfew and urban checkpoints in the 2020 protests, began making TikTok videos about their state of near houselessness, unable to keep up with the demands of rent, as they are sometimes paid $1 to $4 for 1 hour's worth of deliveries. The gig workers are legalized as essential, but left completely unprotected from the ravages of algorithm-governed tech monopolies is not an accident, but an extractive design. From Marx' Estranged Labor, quote, the worker becomes all the poorer the more wealth he produces, the more his production increases in power and size. The worker becomes an ever cheaper commodity, the more commodities he creates. The devaluation of the world of men is in direct proportion to the increasing value of the world of things. Labor produces not only commodities, it produces itself and the worker as a commodity, end quote. We often hear that users or data workers are the product of content, but they are simultaneously content becoming data subjects and objects all at once in a process called subsumption. We may think we are the product of data, but we are in fact the fuel. In Mark Andreevich and Mark Burden's theory of frictionlessness, data flows like oil. In high friction, user tasks are hard to do. In low friction, they are easy to do, Zuhandenheit. When an object disappears, there's some analog precedent for this in Heidegger's readiness to hand, Zuhandenheit, when an object disappears with ease of use. Corporations and platforms hack human behavioral patterns through frictionless automation, like the McDonald's line, "Would you like fries with that?" upon exit. Our Apple Wallet swipes us through the New York City MTA subway system, Netflix offers up a new episode before we lift a finger, and Amazon suggests helpful add-ons to our shopping cart. On the one hand, the predecessor theory of an endless scroll or endless highway is art historically associated with futuristic fascism, whose über alles ideals of speed and functionalism were slated to liberate us from boring material conditions. The frictionless extractive principle of low friction as easy to do removed that pesky paradox of choice, caution, and ethical will. In a letter to shareholders, Bezos argued, quote, "Customers complete 28% of purchases on Amazon in 3 minutes or less, and half of all purchases are finished in less than 15 minutes. Compare that to the typical shopping trip to a physical store, driving, parking, searching store aisles, waiting in the checkout line, finding our car, and driving home. Research suggests that the typical physical store trip takes about an hour. If you assume that a typical Amazon purchase takes 15 minutes, and that it saves you a couple of trips to a physical store a week, that's more than 75 hours a year saved. That's important. We are all busy in the early 21st century." On the other hand, the byproduct of frictionlessness, though he's right, we are busy, is often something much more severe than Bezos' taste in this quote for medium friction. In this user-leaked photo of a hospital floor, the Amazon Echo can only be muted by command if they are muted at all, automatically canceling those pesky things like privacy, GDPR rules, HIPAA laws, and other social norms. What about when the process of frictionlessness doesn't deliver? Slowly and rarely are we hearing from mainstream outlets. This is a McDonald's kiosk, a CNN image from an article posted this month about its betrayal. The kiosks were introduced 25 years ago, which is light years in machinic years to get it right. In one of the earliest mentions of kiosks in fast food settings in 1999, a now defunct trade publication, Business Information, said that McDonald's was working to, quote, "develop an electronic order-taking system that may eventually replace some of its human equivalents." In theory, kiosks should help save on labor. This is a quote. But in reality, restaurants have added complexity due to mobile ordering and delivery, and the labor saved from kiosks is often reallocated for these efforts. These are the words of R.J. Hatovi, an analyst who covers the restaurant and retail industries at data analytics firm Placer AI. Kiosks, quote, "have created a restaurant within a restaurant." In fact, the only speediness or success of the kiosks is in the guaranteed opportunities to market previously undemanded products, or what the industry calls the upsell. Yet even some of these benefits touted by chains don't always play out. A recent study from Temple University researchers found that when a line forms behind customers using kiosks, they experience more stress when placing their orders around kiosks than they do answering a cashier who would typically ask, "Would you like fries or a soda with that?" Not to mention, the kiosk can malfunction or break down. McDonald's frictionless kiosks that eliminated workers don't actually make the experience more useful or effective or enjoyable or even simpler. They create a new category, Sorge, or care for the machines, through displacement of care from worker to customer, transferred onto both workers and customers to the machines. Our favorite example of this is the CVS checkout line in the US. When the machine glitches or breaks down, as it repeatedly does, worker and customer form a non-unionized labor class. Rather than fielding customer orders, workers in this scenario become troubleshooting experts, perhaps even low-code engineers. And this has even resulted in job changes. For example, guest experience lead, which sounds a lot like user experience or UX roles in big tech. I told you so, former McDonald's CEO Ed Renzi said in 2016 after the company expanded kiosks. I and others warned that union demands for a much higher minimum wage would force businesses with small profit margins to replace full-service employees with costly investments in self-service alternatives, end quote. Renzi, of course, attributes the failure of frictionlessness to the threat of unions, which have been demanding in my city a wage increase of $15 an hour, to $15 an hour. Perhaps why the former president, in a staged photograph this week taking orders and serving fries, was a substantial coup, restoring the human and even humble to the now high-tech and human-less world of these machines. And manning the fry machine is also the same job that Vice President Kamala Harris has said she held as a young woman, a biographical detail she revealed in her first campaign cycle and has mentioned repeatedly in this current election cycle. And if you'll indulge this comparison further, I want to take us back to the initial chapter on dirt and the production of history itself possessing a history. Breaking new federal data shows the Biden administration approved 6,430 permits for oil and gas drilling on public lands in their first 2 years, outpacing the Trump administration's 2-year total of 6,172 for a 4% increase. Finally, the Deepwater Horizon disaster of April 20th, 2010 is considered the largest marine oil spill in the history of the petroleum industry. We can't help but read data leaks, which we cannot see, as simulations of oil disasters which are highly spectacularized. They bring to mind Baudrillard's book Simulacra and Simulation, largely seen to have predicted the September 11th attacks on the World Trade Center, for the observation that Americans would find the mushroom clouds of smoke cinematic, so often they had seen them in Hollywood movies. That was apparent in this quote we read of the Deepwater Horizon footage, quote, "It was like setting the ocean on fire. It's like a CGI effect." Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mona Lisa, for this great lecture performance. It's really very timely, I think. Yeah, it was kind of a motto in recent years, this sentence that data is the new oil, but without contextualizing very much what oil extraction is, and I think that you made a very good transition in comparing both kind of extraction. So, yeah, I think maybe my first question would be, I saw that you add some new chapters on the first version that you did. Maybe it would be nice to hear from you. Yeah, how was to approach this topic in more recent times, and yeah, and also another question, maybe combined, is the title that you gave for this project is Oil Research Group. One human oil research group, but also nice to hear from you the provocation behind this, like a one-person collective. Yeah. So.
Thank you. Maybe I'll take the second question first. I think you'll hear that I slipped up a bunch of times and said I and then went to we, and that was not deliberate. Because there it is again. It's messy, right? I sort of take seriously, but is also, there's something kind of funny about a one-woman collective. Like, I take it extremely seriously, but it's in some ways quite unserious, and the project really started in trying to get a bunch of friends to read books on oil and data with me. and they refused. So that's sort of the joke that came out of it between friends was like, well, I'm just going to form my own one woman collective. And so increasingly, I have tried to maintain a rigorous unseriousness, or perhaps a serious unrigor in using we, so that I can speak from a multiplicity of positions and experiences. Can you still hear me? So maybe that's kind of the name, and of course ORG is a very deliberate play on the connection between oil and data, who I am not an originator of. As Natalia said, this is an idea that has been around since Clive Humby invented it. Clive Humby, who you should definitely look up on LinkedIn, is a marketer. He's a British mathematician, and he's the inventor of the loyalty card. So if you ever belong to like a Tesco or a CVS, he invented it. And the idea that data is the new oil really stopped me in my tracks, even though it wasn't an original idea. It was something that I wanted to put to test. Like, if we assume that there's something very precious about oil and something infinite and unprecious about data, well, what if that weren't true? Like, what if we actually subjected that to additional questioning? I think what your first question was about developing the work. Yeah, well, first of all, I hope that this develops into a book. And I really do think of these as chapters, and to the extent that it's possible to visualize them as such, that's important to me. But if you know a publisher, the book, as of yet, has no publisher. And I've, truth be told, found it a very difficult year in which to write. It's been an enormously difficult year to write. And so rather than think of it as like writing a book or something that is just going to be delivered and, you know, possibly collect dust somewhere, I've really tried to think of it as a living organism of a project, and things will turn my attention. So the Calvino short story is one that I read ritually. It's only 4 pages. I highly recommend it in both versions, the translated as well. And, you know, I've noticed in the last time I performed DDDD that this idea of frictionlessness is like not working. Like there's a glitch in the glitch removal. That is actually becoming more pronounced. And I'm seeing, for example, the image that I took about McDonald's was from CNN in this month. That's not something that would have been mainstream, I think, even as late as 2 years ago. And finally, I also work in the tech industry, and I'm often vexed by this idea of thinking about data as oil and data, but what does that make me and what am I making? That's something that I think about a lot, and maybe too much and maybe too obsessively, which is why perhaps in addition to other things, I found it quite a difficult year in which to write. But like you and what you mentioned about your notes for this event, the trove and the repository for these ideas is vast and hopefully taking shape.
Thank you. I think I'll add one more question, and then we could also open it up or move towards informal conversation in the foyer. But I'd be curious about, because you're wearing many hats, maybe that's also part of the we that you're talking about, or that you're identifying in the one human research group. And one of the hats is also literature and linguistic studies. And I was curious about the different sources that went into this piece. And I felt like that maybe, or maybe that's also an assumption of mine, that the literary sources you handle a little bit differently than pieces from news stories or images. And I wondered how your relation to how you would describe your relation to literature, also against the background that this is your desired outcome of this performance, and how this relates to data, and if literature could be considered like a safe haven or an off space, or how literature may also be already imbricated in the flow of data and value.
Can we take a moment and admire that question? That's such a good question. You've really struck at my weak spot, which is poetry. I hate to say a cliche, but I'm going to say a cliche, which is that, you know, poetry is news, and many have died for lack of what is delivered there, to paraphrase. You're right, I do wake up and part of the morning routine is to read the front page headlines just to inform myself what's going on, but I also read my favorite poem, John Berryman, who in my view is sort of like early AI as John Berryman's poems. And I have a project that I'm working on related to that, that I've talked to Natalia just a bit about. So there is this dalliance between the poetic and the computational that I think maybe this work does not necessarily deliver on, or maybe it promises, but it doesn't necessarily fully take you there. But that relationship is something that's incredibly important to me, especially with the advent of generative AI and the promise that AI can, synth AI or generative AI can do it all. In my view, there's still, so let me just say that. I write a lot in terms of generative AI. I write as a generative AI engineer, and I also write quite a bit, and daily, actually. What I said about D does not apply to poetry. I write daily. I wish I had a better answer, and I think you've got me stumped. I think that I do subject them to different, maybe standards of rigor. I almost fell out of my chair because I was developing quadruple D, and Ray Armentrout pulled out this poem about her grandchildren and the plastic in their toys and the polymers of their toys. And so I guess it's one of those things, like if you think about a yellow car, all you see is a yellow car. So it's like all I see it everywhere. And I also think that there's something really powerful about the century of poets that I really care about, and writers like Calvino, who, like me as a millennial, who is a bridge between the analog and the digital, they're also bridges in terms of the machinic and the automatic, and they're having to all of a sudden contend with not the going up and down on a horse and the rhythm of a horse and having to describe that poetically, or even the train, but something else, something that in your editorial statement that you touched on so evocatively, of how do we even talk about this when we're all in different rooms? How do you describe the experience of the digital is something that I think is incredibly important and powerful and seductive, and perhaps, something to be yet written. But I will say also that in terms of being in the same room, I just discovered today that I had the pleasure of discovering that Natalia and I have now been in 3 different cities globally together, which I'm really proud of, because I agree with you. I think that so much of these linkages and interlocutions are happening digitally. They're happening through archival systems, data systems. They seem infinite and unprecious, but there is something perhaps, I don't know, I don't want to get too precious myself, but perhaps something precious about the living and the live. And to me, poetry and literature strike that note of the living and the live. They're not just exemplars of another form of data.
Yeah, thank you, Monalisa. I think that maybe it's a good opportunity for us to open up for questions or comments.
Or to Victor wants to ask something. Yes, please.
Yeah, I was really interested on the idea of exhaustion that you meant, and I think it's something like really it's connecting this idea of resources, of taking the resources, of taking all the resources and not letting anything to the others, and also this digital that was at the beginning at least the promise, that will be resources for everyone. What it matters is the access, not really the property of information and so on. How, I don't know, can you develop that a little bit more, please?
Yeah, another $1 million question. another moment of falling out of my chair was discovering that exhaust is an incredibly historicized term. That what a profound thing that in October of 1492 in the U.S. we celebrate Columbus Day as October 12th, but that discovery, again, I'm sorry for all the scare quotes, but it's incumbent, that discovery in August 12, 1492, what does that have to do with this word, this idea of exhaustion, of extracting until depletion, until there's no more? That production of history, that production of the word as itself having a history really haunts me. I think that I grew up, I'll speak for myself, I grew up always knowing that the British and the it's always the British and the Americans were responsible for the empire-like extractions of Iranian oil. And I just always know that. There wasn't like a class in school. I just always knew that. And it wasn't until discovering this history that I found out that my own family is entangled with it. That Abadan, where you saw Masjid al-Suleiman and the first discovery of Iranian oil, that my great-grandfather was a hakim, which is kind of like a non-MD holding doctor, someone like a medicine man, and that he would go into the homes of the British colonists and, heal them. And I couldn't believe that a story like that had been kept from me until ORG was founded. And I think that speaks to something about these etymologies, these thread lines of history, these productions of history, productions of words, that we are also entangled with it, right? There's not anything outside of its purview. What you say about data is, I think, what's of utmost interest. And in fact, in the editorial statement that you read, Victor, that was really also haunting me, because I was like, wow, it felt like a personal attack. I was like, you really know about my hard drive situation, right? Like these precious resources and hard drives that I can't access because a particular dongle has been misplaced. And that's gone to me, right? Until I go to eBay and order the dongle so that I can access it, right? This is like something that I think is very vexing to, I don't know, there's this, like, don't let your children grow up to be video artists, right? And so that exhaustion, I think, is the flip side of the exhaustion of the extractive economy of oil and petroleum, meaning it's not slippery, it's full of glitches, it's full of stops and starts, it is not good user experience. Apple is always trolling me with a new update, right? There's always something in my way that stops this fluidity. And, obviously, like, this analogy still I find it quite captivating, but there's still this, there's still that difference from the user end. And then, unlike oil, I am not at this moment being ground out for bitumen and coal, right? There's something different, there's something distancing about data. There's something, this property of data as belonging to me or being mine, but it's very cheap, and data marketers and brokers buy it for very cheap, but it's also very precious because it's on the stock market, right? So there's something both incredibly rare and rarefied, but also undignified about data that I hope to keep exploring, and I think your question is perhaps provoking.
Thanks. I love to think of data as undignified. I think that's a very helpful way to approach it, maybe in the next few days, to lose the myth. Should we, are there any more questions to be asked in this setting? Yes.
Thank you very much. Maybe another provocative question. You said you're in tech. I'm also in tech, and this is something I've come across quite recently, also working with data. Something that just occurred to me. Do you think about China? And I'm asking this because recently I've noticed the latest large language models, multimodal large language models that are being developed in China are outperforming some of the other big data companies, and yeah, that's something that's making my mind also quite busy with this.
I don't, but I would love to know at some point what you know about it. So basically you're saying the China models are outperforming like an OpenAI or Anthropic or something. Truly doesn't surprise me. Wish I had access to that. I like analogies if you couldn't tell, and I think the analogy that I have for it is oil is to data what nuclear is to AI. So I just want to make that distinction that I work in tech, but I work in the nuclear option. I shouldn't say that as an Iranian out loud on a recorded live stream. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. And I just want to say that I think your question is also pointing to ways in which data, and much like capitalism, is supposed to hold a promise, right? The free market is supposed to equalize us, because it doesn't matter what your race or your ethnicity or your gender or your nationality is. We're both merchants selling and buying. We're on both parts of the merchant divide, right? That's the promise of the free market. And whether or not that delivers is up for debate. But I think data is also that, right? The promise of anonymity, the promise of the algorithm, that is, right? I hate to play devil's advocate to AI, because I know that, the hype and the trends are so nauseating. But I see it as working quite differently than the algorithmic, in that it's not deterministic. Like the kind of work that I produce is not, I really hesitate to say the word engineer, even though that's my title, because engineering implies a determinism, and this work is not deterministic. But where I was going with that earlier is that I think I like what you point to in China, as far as China exceeding the US Silicon Valley models, because like the free market, data, the world of data, also assumes a global north at its center. It's not supposed to, but it does. And so I'm unsurprised that that isn't, front page news of Forbes or something, because of course that would be very embarrassing if China outperformed us, or Russia outperformed us, right? It's a little bit like going to the moon. Like, it's not supposed to be someone else. But yeah, thank you for your question. I'm eager to learn more.
I would have more questions, but maybe I'm going to save for our roundtable that Monalisa would be also participating the last day. So I think, we can either, if someone has some more question.
I would say also about the roundtable that this lecture really anchors itself in petroleum and the dirt, right, the bitumen. But I'm hoping that I can speak a little bit more about the frictionlessness and of the algorithmic in terms of my own work, particularly web scraping, or the idea of you take large troves of data and you either dump them or leak them, or you do the opposite. You take the dump and you retrieve insights from them, like that generation and that synthesis and what that is. I think the way you all in your editorial have framed it as the endless instant really spoke to me. So just to sort of frame that's a little bit more of my own work and what I've produced in that vein, and I'm incredibly interested to talk to other artists and cultural workers about what they've produced in that framework that you all made.
Great, thank you, Monalisa. I think as Lisa said, you have there's many hats. You're wearing many hats. So yeah, we have many other topics to talk also as well in the roundtable on the last day. So yeah, shall we?
Thank you.
So we can end. And we invite everyone to continue the conversation formally in the foyer. Thank you so much for attending our first event, and then we continue tomorrow at 10 with workshops and And here in the afternoon, yeah, you have the full list of programs, and I hope to see everyone tomorrow. And thank you. And also, I mean, yeah,